And now it's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie.
And welcome to Mob Talk Radio. I'm your host, Jeff Canarsie. We took a week off last week. This week we have Joey Gallo. Obviously, we're going to get to some news and notes before we do that. But I've done Joey Gallo before. And the reason why I'm doing it again is because it was on an old format and the show is no longer out there, so to speak. And a lot of people have been asking for me to do Joey Gallo. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to do some Joey Gallo stuff, a lot of new edition type of information about him that I have, so it should be a good show. But before we get to that, I wanted to get to some news. And yes, I am going to probably talk about some stuff people don't want to hear about, but that's just the reality of what I do. Really, the first thing is that the John Gotti father and son documentary that was scheduled to be on A&E in May is moving from May to June 9th at 10 p.m., following that June 10th at 9 p.m., and then obviously the Gotti film starring John Travolta is going to be out in June. So once again, if you're looking for the Gotti father and son documentary on A&E, tune in June 9th at 10 p.m. and June 10th at 9 p.m. Also on Facebook, you can go to Shadow of My Father. Angela Gotti runs that page, and you can get all your updated news and notes from the film to the documentary through her on that Facebook page. So just go to the top in the search bar, type in Shadow of My Father, and you can get all the information you need there. The other thing I kind of wanted to talk about was Mob Talk Radio, where we're going, what we're doing, what the future holds. A lot of people have been emailing me, asking me, when am I going to take live calls? When is that sort of going to change? And I believe, and don't hold me to this, but I believe in June. One of the things that I think is definitely in the works, there is going to be a brand new webpage which will be password protected. We're going to have interviews, guests, articles, trial coverage, all kinds of different stuff. I'm going to partner in with my buddy Scott, who's going to cover some other facets of true crime that'll be on that page as well. Also going to do something called Mob Haunts, which I'm not going to really talk about to the extent of what that is, but if you've ever wanted to see where Al Capone grew up in Brooklyn or other famous spots in New York City, mafia-related, we have something really cool planned for that. So there's a lot going to be changing. I am going to be taking live call-ins. I'm just waiting to kind of set up the website and get all that going, just to make sure all the kinks are worked out, so that I can bring forward exactly what I want to bring forward. But I think it's going to be probably realistically one of the better websites on the internet for this type of thing. You know, granted, you guys can follow Anastasia or Jerry Capisci and whatever, and they have what they do. But I don't see the validity in reading a half a page of material. So the plan is going to be all-inclusive website, password protected, keep the internet ghouls off the site, which is exactly what I'm going to do. Yes, radio shows will still somewhat be on YouTube, maybe the catalog of the things I've done, but all the new stuff's going to be on the new page. Not to alienate people on YouTube, but the bottom line is that I want more control over the videos and stuff. But we'll talk more about that in the coming weeks as far as that's going to go. Okay, next topic. Here we go. Okay, so Sammy Gravano recently did an interview with Jerry Capisci. It's his prerogative to do an interview, but for some reason, I guess Jerry decided he wanted to poke around and ask Sammy the Bull about Witsec Mafia, the Men's Journal magazine that came out, which John Gotti Jr. wrote, and etc. And Sammy didn't exactly have, the kindest words to say about John Gotti Jr., and I wouldn't expect it to be any less. That's the sort of vitriolic crap that Sammy's always been saying. But one of the things that I wanted to touch on and I'm not going to take up too much of your time with this. I just don't have the energy for the bullshit and the drama. Sammy Gravano should just shut the fuck up. And the reason why I say that is because in the mob genre, can we validate Sammy Gravano? Absolutely. I mean, the guy was a gangster. That much is true. But the problem is that he's no longer relevant. This isn't 1980 anymore. Maybe he has some relevance talking about historical things. But once again, we're talking about a rat. We're talking about an informant who obviously didn't tell the truth to the government. Lots of things sort of started coming out after all of that through Gaspipe Casso, who directly was saying that Sammy Gravano was lying in a lot of instances. And so that's a big reason why Gaspipe Casso's deal was rejected, was because he was bad-mouthing Sammy Gravano, and the government couldn't have that because it would make the government look incredibly foolish, specifically when Gravano was denying selling drugs, which obviously we know he's done. So that being said, as far as Gravano calling John Gotti Jr. a pussy, he's entitled to say what he wants, but he's a 73-year-old prune who doesn't have any gas anymore, and at the end of the day, the one thing that I'm going to hit on, I could hit on a lot of things, and I want to hit on two very important things. Okay, the first part, it's important, but not as important as the second part. The first part is this. A lot of people continuously say that John Gotti brought down the mafia with his mouth and getting caught on tapes. Now, here's my thing. Yes, John Gotti was caught talking on tapes. I don't think anybody has disputed that. I don't think anybody has ever said that that hasn't happened. However, the last time I fucking checked, John Gotti didn't fucking tell on like 100 people. John Gotti didn't tell on other crime families. John Gotti didn't testify in federal court and get 200 and some people locked up. So if you want to talk about the downfall of Cosa Nostra in New York City, it's Sammy Gravano. He's the one that testified. Now, the argument people make to me is that, well, if John hadn't have been on those tapes, none of this would have happened. Bullshit. Weak men talk. Weak men have always talked. So the idea that somehow what John Gotti said led to Sammy doing what he did is bullshit. I don't buy it. It was Sammy's excuse. All of these rats have the same fucking excuse. Time in and time out. It's always, oh, well, he did this, or he testified first, or he talked, or he said this to this person, or that person, and the third person. So it gives them some sort of a valid, cowardly way out to pad an excuse for why they did what they did. Weak men talk, that's the bottom line. So for anybody that wants to argue with me that somehow this is all John Gotti's fault is bullshit. If you look into the history of it and what Sammy was doing, Sammy was killing people to take over businesses. That's proof. That's not bullshit. That's not gossip. That's not my opinion. That's certifiable fact. He killed Louis Melito, who was his best friend, took over his businesses right away. And if you go and you listen to those tapes, Gotti is lamenting on, I'm telling this guy to slow it down. He's buying up too much business. He's hoarding money. He's making himself noticeable. That was the problem. That was the problem. Now, you can make the argument to me if that's why Sammy flipped. But nah, Sammy didn't flip because of that. Sammy flipped because he was a coward and he's fucking weak. Weak men talk. The second thing, which is the most important thing, beyond the most important thing here, Sammy Gravano killed a 17-year-old boy. He talks all this shit to Jerry Capisci about, oh, they need a gangster like me in office to be the president. A drug dealer? Nah, not so much. Sammy Gravano killed Alan Kaiser. He was a 17-year-old boy walking home, minding his own fucking business. Sammy Gravano and Louis Melito pull up in a fucking car, coax him over, and then shotgun him. Killed him. Mistaken identity. By that and that alone, Sammy Gravano should have been killed. Why he wasn't, I will never fucking understand. Why the government never held him accountable for that murder, I will never understand. You know, it's once again, it's the system that, the culture that if you tell on somebody, you can get forgiven for the bullshit you do. Well, what do you say to the Kaiser family? Where's the apology to them? So he can sit with his pruned up, nasty old vampire Nosferatu skin, and he can say all this shit to Jerry Capisci while he's in hiding. But the reality is, he doesn't make any compunction about apologizing for killing a fucking kid. So for all you people out there, because I'm sick of seeing this, because I happen to know Joy Faraci, who is Alan's sister. I see what she goes through every time this scumbag says something. I see what she goes through every time you people come up with Gravano's your fucking hero. Listen, you can have all kinds of heroes in this life. You can look up to mob figures. You can admire them for who they are. I totally understand that. But he killed an innocent kid. He killed an innocent kid. How in the fuck can you justify to me on any fucking level that that's gangster? That's a scumbag fucking thing. You know, you look at murder rates and et cetera in New York City. You kill a 17-year-old kid, you're getting life in prison, but not if you're Sammy Gravano. As long as you tell on somebody else, not a big deal. You can snuff out a kid who is never going to get married, never going to see nieces and nephews, never going to have children of his own, never going to have fucking grandchildren. No, instead what you get is Sammy the Bull talking shit from an undisclosed location. You get his daughter Karen Gravano talking shit. Oh, Papa Bull, Papa Bull. Fuck Sammy Gravano. She can say whatever she wants to. She's living off the name, and that's fine. She's entitled to do what she wants. But you know what? She talks this shit and this stereotype of, oh, who my father is, who my father... Your father killed a 17-year-old kid. Why don't you have some fucking levity and a fucking soul and say, you know what? My father did what he did. That's him. And maybe you make amends somewhere, huh? But no, they're incapable of that. So anybody that sits here and says that the Gottis are living off a name, Gravano's living off a name, get the fuck out of here. Come on. The bottom line is Gravano's a garbage pail, scumbag, low-life piece of shit who killed a 17-year-old kid. He doesn't talk about that. Nowhere in his book does he talk about that. Nowhere on TV does he talk about that. Nowhere in his little fucking stupid diatribes does he talk about that. Which he doesn't really have diatribes, to be honest with you. So the bottom line is, Sammy Gravano, you can say whatever the fuck you want. You're a fucking has-been. And you should just stay in Arizona and do whatever it is the fuck you do. Looking like fucking Gollum from Lord of the Rings and shit. It just pisses me off because I see what Joy goes through every fucking day because of this miserable prick. I could say the same thing about Gaspipe Casso. He did the same fucking thing. Killed Nicky Guido, an innocent guy, the wrong fucking Nicky Guido. Uli Ippolito and fucking Stephen Caracappa told Casso, let us go make sure this is the right guy. Casso didn't want it. He wanted blood. So they said, okay, whatever. And what does he do? He goes and kills the wrong fucking guy. Not that murder is right in any stretch of the imagination, but he kills an innocent guy. They're going to hold Gaspipe in fucking prison because, you know, he was saying the opposite about Sammy Gravano. Government doesn't want to hear that. God forbid that the government comes out and looks like a bunch of fucking liars, which they are. They make shit up. They allow informants to curb their testimony. I cannot tell you how many informants have said that the FBI encourages them, not asks them, encourages them to tailor their fucking testimony. And this all leads to the third part, which is why Witsec Mafia by John Gotti Jr., Christopher Casparosa, and Richard Stratton is very important. As a society, it is time we stop rewarding rats. If you're going to reward a rat, at least make sure he's telling the truth. But 90% of the time these guys come out because they get a good fucking deal. What do? They go out and break fucking laws again. They haven't learned nothing. They can stand on their little fucking platform, their little soapbox and say, I'm a changed man and everything I'm doing is good now. Bullshit. Get the fuck out of here. Witsec Mafia is very important for a multitude of reasons. If you have not seen John Gotti Jr.'s YouTube video, go on YouTube, type in Witsec Mafia John Gotti Jr. You can also go to witsecmafia.com. It's going to be a book that's written by John Gotti Jr. There is going to be a documentary that is coming out, produced and directed by Chris Casparosa and Richard Stratton. It's very important. This isn't about drawing lines with friendships. This isn't about sticking up for one side or the other. This is like common decency type of shit. Guys like Gravano were scumbags, not just because he ratted, but because he killed a kid. At some point, the government has to hold people accountable when they come out and they do this shit again. That's not gangster, that's bitch. So that's all I got on Sammy Gravano. Like I said, I didn't really want to get into it, but the thing is like, I think it takes an awful lot of fucking balls for a guy that's the fucking one of the biggest rats to come out who killed a 17-year-old kid and run his mouth like he's still somebody. Is he a tough guy? I'm sure he is. I'm sure he was. That's not the point. The point is, You want to talk all this shit? Own up to what you did. Apologize to Joy Faraci, the Kaiser family. She's the one that has to go through this every fucking day. So for all you people that are fans of Sammy Gravano, know this. You can idolize him all you fucking want, but he's a scumbag. He's a bottom-dwelling, drug-dealing. He sold drugs to kids with fucking white supremacists. How fucking low scumbag garbage pail does it get than that? And as long as I have a breath in my fucking lungs sitting here, this isn't a tough guy act, this is the truth. I will defend Joy. I will defend the memory of Alan Kaiser. Because he can sit there looking like a shriveled fucking prune at 73 and put his head on his pillow at night. Joy can't. She has to live with this every day for the rest of her fucking life. So pick new fucking idols. Pick new people to live up to admire. Not fucking child killers. We'll be back on Mob Talk Radio. In my travels, I'm always looking for a clothing brand that I feel like represents me. Anybody can go to a store and buy a t-shirt with a gimmick, but if you believe in 3 core values like I do, loyalty, honor, and respect, then look no further than Omerta brand clothing. You can catch them at omertamia.com, OMERTAMIA.com, with locations in Europe, California, Boston, Brooklyn, Florida, Pennsylvania, and Washington. They have a great clothing line with hats, shirts, sweatshirts, keychains, anything you might need, stickers. You want the rats to stop snitching? Go right out and get yourself a sticker. But if you want to live your life by the gentleman's code, look no further than Omerta brand clothing. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. Today we are talking about Joey Gallo. It's not going to be one of the larger shows that I've done, only because the subject material isn't as in-depth as, say, some of the other historical guys that I do, but we will try to make it the best as usual. And really quick, you can follow me on Twitter at RealMobTalk7. Go on Facebook, type in Mob Talk Radio. Also give Scott Williams Collier a like on Twitter. He is at the True Crime page, also on Facebook as well. Scott is going to be doing some serial killer stuff, which is really cool. So definitely, if you like my stuff, you'll like his. Just give him a follow, give him a like. Check him out on YouTube as well under the True Crime page. Also, there's links on our Facebook page to that. Also, we have the True Crime and Mob Talk Radio blog. All those links are on Facebook as well. If you're looking for articles, there was a recent article we did on the Italian Mafia in Italy and what's going on there. Pretty interesting stuff, so definitely give it a look-see. Okay, Joey Gallo was born April 7th, 1929 in New York City. He was brought up in the Red Hook section of Brooklyn. His father, Umberto, was a bootlegger during Prohibition and didn't really shy away from pushing his sons into the criminal life. Joey would drop out of high school as a freshman, Brooklyn High School of Automotive Trades in 1949. After watching the film Kiss of Death, Gallo would begin to imitate the character Tommy Udo. In 1950, he would be arrested and would be put in Kings County Hospital for acting erratically, and he would end up being diagnosed as schizophrenic. Now, Crazy Joe Gallo, and that's where the moniker comes from. Prior to 1950, he was in the United States Navy, and I believe in 1946, he was honorably discharged out of the United States Navy for acting erratically and almost schizophrenic. Now, whether or not I said Joey Merlino, that's great. Things on my brain. Whether or not Joey Gallo was certifiably schizophrenic or not, I don't think we'll really know. But anybody that's ever known him has said on record that he was erratic, couldn't sit still, maybe some ADHD type of stuff. But he was diagnosed as schizophrenic when he was put into the Kings County Hospital. That being said, we will probably never know. Joey would get his start as an enforcer and a hitman for Joe Profaci. Gallo would also run floating crap games, high-stakes poker. He would extort shop owners and pool halls for protection as well. And then he would go on to form his own numbers racket. He used his apartment on President Street as his headquarters and allegedly kept a lion named Cleo in the basement. In a few short years, Gallo would own several nightclubs and several sweatshops in the garment district in Manhattan. In 1957, Joe Profaci goes to Joey Gallo and asks him to orchestrate the murder of Albert Anastasia. Now, there's a reason why, and we're going to get to that. The murder of Anastasia has long been disillusioned over the years, but here are the facts as far as I know them. So why was Anastasia killed? There's a ton of reasons, but it all goes back to the same sort of Machiavellian mob boss, Carlo Gambino. Carlo Gambino and Vito Genovese had many discussions regarding Albert Anastasia. The issues the Genovese had with the commission at the time were problematic. In 1951 or 1952, Frank Costello appoints Genovese as his underboss as a result of the awful testimony of Willie Moretti at the Kefauver hearings. Willie Moretti was absolutely awful in these hearings, really did not give the mob plausibility to deny that they existed, didn't give the mob plausible deniability on a lot of different things. And as a result, Willie Moretti would end up being killed. Now, if you go back in history and you look at the Moretti brothers, even the Fischettis as well, Frank Sinatra was very close to all of them. So that's just a little sort of trivia thing there. When Moretti is killed, that's when Vito Genovese gets promoted by Costello. Genovese wanted Costello's position, and he knew he couldn't do it. He knew Costello had deep pockets. He knew he had a lot of killers around him. And the only way that Genovese could really effectively remove Costello from power was if he went to another up-and-comer or another underboss or another boss to get him sort of in on the deal. And that guy was Carlo Gambino. Genovese knew that Costello's strong relationship with Anastasia would really create problems. So in other words, if he goes and moves on Anastasia, the fact that Anastasia and Costello are so close, it's going to create a schism effect, and ultimately Genovese would probably be killed in retribution. But Genovese is sort of smart here because he realizes that Carlo Gambino, who at the time was Albert Anastasia's underboss, wanted to be boss. And at Gambino's age, he was in his mid-40s, I believe, in 51 or 52, and Gambino really wanted to take over, but he realized at his age, the reality was Albert Anastasia was fairly young. Anastasia could have a run till he was 80, which would in effect make Carlo a very old man if he was ever able to take over the leadership. And so that's kind of what Genovese goes to Carlo Gambino about. You want to be boss. Maybe if we do something here or there, you can be boss now rather than having to wait 30 years. And in effect, Gambino agrees to go with the idea. But Gambino is very, very shrewd. He was not a fan of Genovese in any stretch of the imagination, but he also realized that coming together for a common cause, because the common cause was if Anastasia goes, then Genovese can effectively remove Costello from power, and Genovese can be the mob boss of his own family, and Gambino can get what he wants. So it was sort of a mutual benefit on both sides. So what ends up happening in 1957 is Costello almost gets killed by Vincent Gigante. Everybody knows the story. Costello is walking into his apartment building, and Vincent Gigante steps out of the shadows, goes, "Hey, this is for you, pop, pop," and he ends up fucking up the hit. But ultimately, they wanted to remove Costello first. Luckily for Vito Genovese, it's enough for Costello to see the writing on the wall. He doesn't want any more part of this shit. He wants to get out and just sort of live his life in peace and quiet. And so what that essentially does is it enables Genovese to move in the way he wants to. But the problem is they still have to worry about Anastasia. And so basically, the minute that Costello gets shot, plans are already underway for Genovese and Gambino to hit Anastasia. And what they end up doing is going to Joe Profaci and asking him for help. Joe Profaci didn't have a problem getting involved, but they needed Joe Profaci to sort of give them the men. October 25th of 1957, Albert Anastasia walks into the Park Sheraton Hotel, goes down to the barbershops, getting a shave and a haircut, and two men with their faces covered in scarves walk in and just blow Anastasia away, kill him. Everybody's seen the famous photos. Anastasia is flat on his back, dead. The two shooters in that hit were none other than Joey Gallo and Carmine Persico. So now with Anastasia out of the way, Gambino can take over his side, and Genovese can sort of step in and take over Costello's role. In 1958, Joey Gallo and his brothers Larry and Albert were called to testify before the McClellan Committee of the U.S. Senate on Organized Crime. If you're unfamiliar with that, you can type in McClellan Committee, Senate hearings, organized crime. You can see, them parading in every fucking gangster from A to Z. The Gallo brothers didn't say much at the hearing. I think Joey Gallo smoked cigarettes and wore his dark sunglasses and just kind of muttered to himself, didn't really say a lot. Then in 1961, Joe Gallo decides that he wants to be the boss. Now, here's what's really interesting. At the time, this is obviously the Profaci family, and he thinks that he can step in directly and kill Profaci, and it's going to cause all kinds of problems for crazy Joe Gallo. So what he ends up doing is he comes up with this idea. He formulates this idea that he's going to kidnap the entire leadership of the Profaci family. While Profaci himself would end up escaping capture, his brother-in-law and underboss Joe Magliacco and 4 capos were captured. The Gallo brothers demanded a large amount of money to release them. Joe Gallo had wanted to kill one of the hostages first, which was, out of curiosity, it was Joe Colombo, was one of the capos he captured. Joey wanted to kill one of them to send a message. But his brother Larry, who was a little higher up in the mob, he had been in the mafia longer, overruled him and says, no, you can't do that. Let's just get the money and let's just keep it the way it is. A few weeks would go by, but ultimately Profaci would end up paying the ransom, but he wouldn't forget what Joe Gallo did. Profaci was furious and would get revenge, but it wouldn't be in his lifetime. So what Joe Profaci does, he has a problem. He has to get close to Joey Gallo, and the only way that he can really do that is find a subordinate of Gallo to sort of get an inside track. And who he goes to is Carmine the Snake Persico. Carmine gets the nickname the Snake specifically for what I'm about to tell you. He goes to Carmine Persico and says, listen, I need information on Joey Gallo. I need to know where he's hiding. I want this guy taken out. So I'll give you $100,000 if you join my side of things and give me information on Joey Gallo. Carmine, the Snake Persico, has absolutely zero problem taking $100,000 and switching sides. Then in May of 1961, Profaci's gunmen hit Joe Goelli, who was Gallo's top enforcer at the time. They end up dumping Gielli's clothing stuffed with fish in front of a diner where Gallo's men frequented. So, going back to The Godfather, the part where Luca Brasi is killed and the bulletproof vest shows up on the porch with the fish, it's a Sicilian message. This is directly where that was taken. This is directly where that was taken from. Then in August of 1961, the specific date was August 20th, Larry Gallo is lured to the Sahara Lounge, which was a Brooklyn supper club at the time. Once inside, Profaci's hitmen, including Carmine Persico, tried to strangle Gallo. However, a nosy police officer passing by threatened to hit. Now, if you go back to The Godfather, there is a scene where Frank Pantangeli walks into a bar, and I believe it was Danny Aiello, the actor, who put a piano wire around Pantangeli's throat saying, Michael Corleone says hello, and then the cops come in and the hit gets botched. Once again, we're seeing that art imitates life, and that was taken directly from the Godfather film as well. So once Larry Gallo is almost killed, strangled to death, the first official Colombo War begins. Joey Gallo would retreat to his headquarters, where he and his men would go to the mattresses. Once again, we see another Godfather reference of going to the mattresses, and that's exactly what they did. Joe's father, Umberto, would move into this the headquarters where 20 or 25 guys were all sleeping in the same room. It was stockpiled with automatic weapons, and they actually called this place the dormitory. And Joe's father Umberto would come in and cook for them all day long. The problem was, though, is while they're hiding out in this, what they called the dormitory, they weren't able to maintain control of their rackets. They weren't able to collect the VIG. They weren't ever able to collect protection money. And as a result, money starts to go low, and Joey realizes he's got to do something, and he ends up leaving the apartment to try and shake down a nearby cafe owner, which was northwest, within viewing distance of the apartment window. There was a coffee shop and a little cafe, and Joey realized that he couldn't go out too far into Brooklyn, but if he just went across the street, he could shake a guy down across the street, he could get some money coming in, and it wasn't a big deal. The problem is that owner wasn't going to deal with Joey Gallo, and he immediately calls the police on Joey Gallo. Then in November of 1961, Joe Gallo ends up getting convicted for conspiracy and extortion for attempting to extort money from that very cafe owner, and it ends up probably saving Joey Gallo's life in the meantime. Then in December 21st of 1961, Joey Gallo gets sentenced 7 to 14 years in state prison for that extortion. With that, we will be right back. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. We are talking about the one and only Crazy Joe Gallo. Where we left off was in December 21st of 1961. Joey Gallo gets sentenced to 7 to 14 years in state prison for trying to shake down and extort the cafe owner who was across the street from the headquarters called the dormitory. So Joey ends up going to prison, and he ended up serving his time at 3 different prisons. The first one was Greenhaven. The second one was Attica, and the third one was Auburn. While he was at Greenhaven, Joey Gallo ends up growing very close to Leroy Nicky Barnes. Now, obviously, I would hope to God all of you would know who Nicky Barnes was. Nicky Barnes was a humongous narcotics trafficker, owned all of Harlem at one point, and Nicky was doing a stretch in Greenhaven for drug trafficking. Joey Gallo, while there, predicted accurately that there would be a power shift in the Harlem drug rackets from the mafia to African-American gangs. And what he does, he ends up teaching Barnes how to upgrade his criminal organization. The one thing that Barnes, and I'm not saying that Nicky Barnes wasn't good at this, but Nicky Barnes didn't have an organizational structure at the time. Nicky Barnes was very much just a mover and a shaker, selling what he could when he could. But Joey Gallo, this is the wrong word. I don't want to say entrepreneur, but Joey Gallo saw that ultimately the Italian mob was going to be pushed out of Harlem at some point by the African-American drug dealers. And he saw in Nicky Barnes sort of a swagger, and he realizes very early on that Nicky Barnes is going to be a leader in those drug rackets. And so what he begins to do is he begins to teach Nicky Barnes how to ultimately organize a crew, and to sort of instill a mafia type of pyramid chain of command, one that which Nicky Barnes ultimately, when he gets out, ends up doing. And it lent itself to Nicky Barnes becoming one of the biggest drug traffickers the United States has ever seen. Not the biggest. Frank Lucas was bigger, and there was another guy who was bigger than Frank Lucas, but it's the same sort of thing. Gallo would also begin to recruit African Americans as soldiers in the Gallo crew. Now, this has long been a hotly debated subject and sort of a rumor that Joey Gallo was making African Americans into his crew. That's untrue. That's not even like reality, but a lot of people seem to catch on to that rumor and go with it, and that wasn't what happened. And we're going to talk more specifically about that here in a few minutes, but that was the rumor that was started by others outside of the Gallo circle, and it scared the shit out of the rest of the mob for a lot of different reasons. I don't think that they necessarily believed he was making African Americans, but I think at the same time, the fact that he had a compunction to enlist them to work for him in certain facets scared the rest of the mob. What is this guy doing? He's making black guys. Like, what are you doing? This is not how things work. So all that being said, it's not true that Joey Gallo was making African Americans. He hired them to do certain things, but while he's in prison, he begins to recruit African Americans as soldiers in the Gallo crew, which means once they get to the outside, he's got work for them. He's got street soldiers in the sense of guys that will shoot weapons to defend him, et cetera, et cetera. Other organized crime inmates that were doing time with Joey Gallo in Greenhaven and in Auburn really didn't like the fact that, and more specifically really in Greenhaven, but they didn't like the fact that he was even talking to Barnes. Now, if you look at historically in prison, everything is aligned by color. Unfortunately, it's just the way the prison system works. The blacks don't talk to the whites don't sit with the blacks. Everybody is segregated by obviously their skin color, which is unfortunate, but that's the reality of the prison system. And so the idea that Joey Gallo is eating lunch with this guy, he's even talking to him, begins to infuriate other Italian organized crime inmates who completely stop talking to Joey Gallo as a result. Not only do they stop talking to him, but they won't protect him anymore either. Not only will they not protect him, but then word begins to get back to street guys about what Joey Gallo is up to in prison, which is going to create a problem for Joey. In August 29th of 1964, Joey Gallo ends up suing the Department of Corrections, stating that the guards inflicted cruel and unusual punishment at Greenhaven after Joey Gallo allowed an African American to cut his hair. Prison officials claimed Gallo was belligerent and an instigator in that issue. I'm not really sure. I tried to look up some case files on this, and I couldn't find anything. But I think what the issue was that Joey Gallo didn't see color. And he didn't mind if a black guy cut his hair in prison. It was no big deal. But apparently in those days, we're talking 1964, that's right around the race riot time and all that, the crazy 60s. And so it was a huge faux pas. What Joey Gallo did. And so as a result, the guards obviously had a huge issue with what Joey Gallo was doing. So he ends up suing them as a result, saying, look, anybody can cut my fucking hair. What are you, nuts? So that's where that comes from. While he was in Auburn prison, Joey Gallo took up painting. He also became a voracious reader, reading books by Jean-Paul Sartre, Frank Kafka, Albert Camus, Alexander Dumas, who wrote The Three Musketeers, Victor Hugo, Leo Tolstoy, and obviously my favorite author, Niccolo Machiavelli. So Joey becomes a really voracious reader, and one of the things that sort of happens as a result is I hate to say it like this, but he's making himself smarter. He's giving himself sort of a socialite type of commentary that he can have. So when you consider the table and talk about Tolstoy and Victor Hugo, and it sort of just made Joey in a different caliber as far as what his social circle when he left prison would be. It turns out to be sort of his undoing in the end. Not that there's anything wrong with reading books, you know what I mean? But I think that it sort of gave him an arrogance and an affluence that he allowed himself to sort of just go a little too crazy with. Also, while in Auburn prison, he would end up saving an officer's life during a riot, who would later testify at Joey Gallo's parole hearing. In May of 1968, Larry Gallo dies of cancer. In 1971, Joey Gallo gets released from prison, but prison had really taken a toll on Joey Gallo. One of the things that happens to a lot of these guys who go to prison is they develop blood clots from being locked down 24/7 and stuff like that. Joey Gallo didn't suffer from that. He just came out gaunt and skinny. He was no longer Joey the Blonde, which was his nickname when he was a kid. He wasn't no longer a handsome and fit guy. He looked like skeleton. He was old. He was disheveled. He was gaunt. And as he gets out, Joey begins to frequent high society events. That connection began with actor Jerry Orbach. Jerry Orbach has been in a lot of films, and specifically he played a role called Kid Sally Colombo, which was in a film called The Gang That Couldn't Shoot Straight. It's an absolutely hilarious film. The book was written by Jimmy Breslin. If you ever get a chance to read that book, my father handed me that book at like 14 and said, you got to read this. It's the funniest shit I've ever read. Then the movie came out, obviously, and I saw that, I think, on VHS with my father. But the book is really great. The Gang That Couldn't Shoot Straight by Jimmy Breslin. My father was very tickled by Mama. Mama said the funniest stuff. You watcha you ass. She just said stuff like that's stereotyped Italian grandmother type of stuff, but it was so funny. But anyway, Jerry Orbach's character in that film was based on Joey Gallo. It was a very loose interpretation, and how they ended up meeting was Joey Gallo's a little pissed off at the way that Jerry Orbach played him. He sort of played him like a buffoon, like somebody who wasn't smart, and eventually the two sit down at dinner and they discuss it. But they end up becoming close friends, and Orbach would end up inviting Joey Gallo to these Hollywood-style elitist parties. So his social circle, which used to be Jimmy the Mook, Tommy Fingers, and street guys, now it sort of changes to guys like Joan Hackett and David Steinberg, the comedian, and Peter Stone, like Hollywood elitists, Hollywood actors. And he goes so far to enjoying this sort of circle that he's in, he sells his apartment on President Street and ends up moving to Greenwich Village, which at the time was all like theater people and actors and actresses, hoity-toity kind of people, because he wanted to be closer to his new circle of friends. But we sort of have to go back for just a second, because we have to go back to why Joey Gallo, what was going on when he was in prison, that's sort of going to start this other bullshit drama that happens to him. While Gallo's in prison, there were a lot of big changes. June 7th of 1962, Joe Profaci dies of cancer. Joe Magliocco takes over, but he gets convicted, then he continues to fight Larry Gallo and Albert Gallo. So while Joe Gallo's in prison, his brothers have taken the war to Joe Magliocco's ass. In 1963, through negotiations with the Patriarcha crime family, there was a peace agreement reached between the Gallos and Magliocco. The go-between on that was Raymond Patriarcha. If you're not familiar with him, go ahead and look up information on him. But he was the boss of the New England Mafia for a long time. But he was the peace negotiator between the two. I'm laughing because I know what my attorney Elio Forcina is doing right now. He's cracking up. So anyway, all that being said, in late 1963, the commission forces Magliocco to resign and install Joe Colombo, who was close to Carlo Gambino at the time. The Profaci family becomes the Colombo crime family. Joe Colombo then begins to alienate himself with a Gambino. And this is sort of what's leading to the culmination of something else. Whereas Gambino and Costello were close at the time, what ends up happening is Joe Colombo starts his Italian-American Civil Liberties League bullshit. Not only does he start that, but he talks bad about The Godfather, and the legends has it that he made Mario Puzo take mafia and any sort of mafia-related lingo out of the screenplay of The Godfather. That's absolutely unequivocally a falsehood. That's not true. Joe Colombo never did that. That was Russell Buffalino who controlled all of that. So I don't know where that comes from. But also, Joe Colombo begins to have these huge civil rights things, and he even pickets the FBI and says that the FBI has, personal problems with the Italians and blah, blah, blah. And it's creating a real issue for the mafia. One, he's being outspoken, which they don't want. Two, it's drawing heat. And Carlo Gambino repeatedly warns him, you got to tone it down, you got to stop. This is supposed to be a secret thing. You're calling attention to yourself. You're a boss of a family, and you're in public. You're doing fucking radio. You're doing press releases. You're talking to reporters. It's got to stop. And so what Gambino finally decides is that Colombo's just not going to stop, and something has to be done. There's too much heat. So secretly, he sends a messenger to meet with the Gallo brothers. And he says, keep the war going. Keep pressuring Colombo. And he wanted pressure put on Colombo because Colombo, if he's in war, it puts the pressure and the less opportunity and the less risk he's going to take by having these huge fucking speeches in front of like thousands of people. And more importantly, Carlo Gambino wanted them to challenge Colombo's leadership. Not that fucking Gambino wants the Gallos in charge of anything, because they were all crazy and they were not controllable, but he wanted the Colombo Italian-American Civil Rights League bullshit to end. Joey Gallo ends up coming out of prison, and Colombo and Joe Machiavelli end up inviting Joey Gallo to a meeting. It was sort of a meeting to say, hey, welcome home, bygones be bygones, it's back to business as usual, and he ends up handing Joey Gallo $1,000, and it infuriates Gallo. Gallo looked at this as disrespect, and the reason why Joe Colombo and Joe Machiavelli do this was it was meant to ensure peace, that peace would remain, especially the peace that Ray Patriarca helped them gain. But Gallo told them through a messenger after that initial meeting that he wasn't bound by the 1963 peace accord, and he wanted $100,000 to keep the peace, or he was going to go back to the mattresses again. We can sort of digest that. It probably wasn't a smart move on Joey Gallo's part. It was probably a little too brazen. But Joey Gallo felt like he shouldn't have to listen to what Ray Patriarca had to say. He felt like he didn't have to abide by anybody else, especially when you consider now he's got the backing of Carlo Gambino, and Carlo Gambino's telling him, take it to Colombo's ass. Just keep taking it to his ass. And that's probably it's probably a direct result of why he did what he did. But as a result of that action of basically telling Colombo go fuck himself, Colombo orders the murder of Joey Gallo. Also, at the time, Joe Colombo was on appeal for perjury charges. So now we've got all this crap where Colombo's facing charges of perjury. He's threatened the contract to hit on Joey Gallo. It's going to cause a lot of problems for everybody. Then in April of 1971, Carlo Gambino discusses the issues surrounding Colombo again. He's entirely fed up. He won't stop. He once again tries to talk him out of the civil liberties nonsense, but he won't do it. Also, Gambino's not happy about the Godfather film, which Colombo's talking about. There was just so much going on that Gambino has absolutely fucking had it. And one of the things that ends up happening is Joe Colombo's got to go. That's the bottom line. Joe Colombo's got to go. And the only way that this is really honestly going to get done is if Gambino orders it along with some others. And Gambino, Russell Bufalino, and Joe Gallo decide that he's got to go. Not that Russell Bufalino he was able to essentially say, yep, I agree. But they needed to bring Joey Gallo in to do it. And Joey Gallo, in turn, obviously is going to end up taking care of it in a different way. A lot of people say that Joey Gallo is the one that shot and killed Joe Colombo. He's not. I probably said that before, but I was definitely wrong. On June 28th, 1971, at a rally in Columbus Circle, Colombo is shot and killed by a fake newspaper reporter named Jerome A. Johnson, who was an African-American posing as a fake news reporter. Colombo's security would end up shooting and killing Johnson in the street. Colombo would go on to survive the shooting, but would end up going into a coma, and he would die later in 1978. Police could not pin the murder on anybody but Johnson himself. Machiavelli long believed that it was Joey Gallo who hired Johnson for the murder because of the belief that Joey's Gallo head was on a platter, and because of Joey Gallo's long association with black gang members. And that's absolutely true. And Joe Machiavelli would be absolutely correct in that. Johnson was directly affiliated with Nicky Barnes, who was affiliated with Joey Gallo, and that's sort of the way it went down. But the only way that happened was Gambino ordered it and allowed it to happen, along with other crime bosses. Joe Colombo just got too big for his britches. There was way too much conversation and dialogue going out for any of them, and that's the way that these things are done. The same sort of thing happened to Sam Giancana when he got too big for his britches. Continue to act erratic and talk to the press and be seen in the press. This is just how things were done. And April 7th of 1972 was a big day. Joey Gallo was looking for dinner and ends up finding Umberto's Clam House. There was nothing else open, so he ends up going into Umberto's Clam House in Manhattan. Joey was there celebrating his 42nd birthday with his sister Carmela and his wife Sina and her children and his bodyguard Pete the Greek Diopoulos. Prior to that, he and Jerry Orbach had dined at the Copacabana watching Don Rickles perform. Four gunmen. Now, this is what the testimony was of people that were in there, is that between courses, four gunmen burst into the diner with 38 and 32 revolvers. Joey tried to grab his gun. 20 shots are fired, and Joey Gallo would be shot in the elbow, the ass, and the chest. He would end up tossing the table over and escaping, but he would end up dying on the pavement outside of the restaurant. Now, this is where it gets interesting. A lot of people have said there were four shooters. Frank Sheeran, who has long, I think actually is the one that shot Joey Gallo. He was on record as saying that he did it. I don't think there were four shooters. I think it's a lot more plausible to believe that there was only two guys that entered that restaurant that night and shot Joey Gallo. There's a lot of reasons why Gallo was killed to begin with. Joey Gallo needed to be hit because he just refused to, I guess, sort of lay down and just get along with the program. And Gambino, and I think ultimately, if you're looking for the guy who called that murder, it had to have been Gambino and other people. Gambino knew enough to know that Joey Gallo was going to create friction for them. They didn't like the social circle that Joey Gallo was in. He was nuts. He was a nutty guy, and he didn't want to sort of get organized. He wanted to be his own entity, and Gambino used him for what he needed him for. And Gambino was Machiavellian in that sense. He had done it many times before. But the hit on Joe Colombo, which was very public, indirectly can be drawn back to Carlo Gambino. But you know what? Joey Gallo was too loose for his britches. They didn't like the social circle, and so he had to go. And the reason why they used Frank Sheeran, it's my belief, is because Frank Sheeran was a big Irish guy. He was doing hits for mob bosses Russell Buffalino and Jimmy Hoffa. And nobody that was Italian could get close to Joey Gallo. Nobody could get that close to Joey Gallo. But a big fucking Dunsky-looking Irish guy probably could get close to Joey Gallo. And that's what I believe happened. And if you read the book, I Heard You Paint Houses, which is the story of Frank Sheeran, also going to be a film called The Irishman starring Robert De Niro and Al Pacino and Harvey Keitel and others, is that Frank Sheeran is the one who shot Joey Gallo. The FBI put Frank Sheeran at the top of their highest-ranking non-made Italian members of the mafia. Jimmy Burke, I believe, was like number 2 on that list. And so, not to say that the FBI is accurate in everything they say, because God knows they aren't. But in this particular case, I do believe it, and it's mainly because of his association with Russell Buffalino and Jimmy Hoffa that Frank Sheeran had so much power. And I fully believe that Frank Sheeran walked in there and shot Joey Gallo. I have no doubt to believe it was anybody else. There's been long been rumors that it was Machiavelli himself or it was DiBiase and some of these other guys, but I don't believe that. I believe it was Frank Sheeran that did it. Seems a lot more likely. The FBI seems to believe that. They were able to corroborate some witnesses that actually did see Frank Sheeran running out of the building. So if you have witnesses that are corroborating that, that are unwilling to testify back in those days, then that should tell you everything that you need to know sort of about that. Some other little tidbits about Joey Gallo that a lot of people may not know. And one of the biggest ones was that Vic Amuso was in his crew. Vico Musso was in the crew, and he was an enforcer. He started as an enforcer for Joey Gallo. Vico Musso allegedly killed several members of the Profaci faction, but ends up getting sent to prison in the early 60s with Joey Gallo and others for extortion charges. After Gallo's execution, the crew would disband, and Vico Musso would end up going to the Lucchese crime family. We obviously know where Vico Musso ends up. Then he'd end up going on to be an associate of the 19th Hole crew, who was under, at the time, Christy Tick Funari. Joey Gallo has been profiled in a lot of movies. There was a Peter Boyle movie, I think, where he played Joey Gallo. But if we look back at the history of Joey Gallo, what makes him a very polarizing figure is that he was able to intermix into different social circles. What made him, and I think why a lot of people cling on to his story, is because he was fucking nuts. He didn't abide by the rules. I don't think that he necessarily agreed to a code. Like, if you look at Chicago organized crime traditionally anyway, Al Capone didn't believe in a making ceremony. Al Capone just believed, hey, you're a criminal, come on and work for me. So Al Capone was not a guy that sort of fell into that sort of mold of pageantry, of a making ceremony, and et cetera. And I think Joey Gallo was pretty much the same way. I think Joey Gallo's had a lot of Luciano in him, in the sense that he didn't care what color you were. He didn't care about your ethnic background. If you wanted to be a criminal, you could be a criminal, come work for me. And that's the way Joey Gallo believed. But the problem is that went against tradition, and it went against what it was in those days. And that was something that really infuriated the mob in general. And two, when you have somebody that's a loose cannon like that, it's just a matter of time before he was going to do something really stupid. And they had to cut the head off the snake at that point. And it's unfortunate for Joey Gallo because he was so young, but at the same time, when you live essentially recklessly like that, then you sort of get what's coming to you. His brothers would end up pretty much dying out with what was left of the Gallo crew. And that's the story of Joe Gallo. I know it was a shorter story than you guys are used to, but Joey Gallo's life wasn't very large in terms of historical things. He killed Albert Anastasia, a huge hit. He was involved in some very historical moments, but at the end of the day, he was just too much of a basket case. He never would have survived being a leadership in another family. He was just too reckless, didn't care about killing people. He did not like to negotiate. And so some of the, I want to say, theatrical pageantry that we're used to seeing in films, Joey Gallo was not the guy that was going to sit down in a diner and cut up money with somebody. He's not the kind of guy that was going to sit there and debate turf. He was going to grab a gun and he was going to kill you, and that was the end of it. And that's why Joey Gallo's life was so short. He wasn't able to sort of navigate the waters the right way. His way to navigate waters was to just kill anybody that got in his way. And ultimately, that's what led him down the path that it did. So I think historically, when we look back, Crazy Joe Gallo is Crazy Joe Gallo. 2 Colombo wars. I did not hesitate to take the war to the mob's ass. But like I said, you also have to take in consideration when he takes on a boss like Joe Profaci and the other families don't step in. That should tell you something. And one of the big misnomers that people I don't think understand about that is Profaci was not beloved by anybody. The other families didn't like him. His own men fucking hated him. He was another guy that pinched the quarter till the eagle screams, and just was more concerned with lining his pockets than keeping everybody happy. And so, what you come to is Joey Gallo, I think, recognized early on that he wasn't going to get anywhere by following Profaci's orders. And I think he also knew that Profaci's men weren't really happy with him anyway. So I think he rolled the dice on that, and he ended up winning. And he ends up winning that because, thank God, he gets sentenced to prison for a while, which kind of takes him off the streets. And when he does, Profaci dies. Because had the war kept going on, I don't know if Joey Gallo would have survived that. But the moral of the story here is that you got to navigate the waters. If you're going to be involved in a criminal lifestyle like Joey Gallo was, or Joe Profaci, you got to be a negotiator. Now, there can't be 2 Carlo Gambinos. There was only one Carlo Gambino, probably the biggest Machiavellian, shrewdest mob boss. Just some of the stuff that he was able to acquire or attain by being smarter than everybody was just, it's stuff of legend. But Joey Gallo will go down as a legend, probably as, a guy that didn't take shit from anybody and a guy that took it to the mob's ass if he didn't get what he wanted. And, you live by the gun, you die by the gun. And that's the reality of that lifestyle. It ends in two ways, either death or prison. And that's just it. So, with all that being said, that was the Joey Gallo Show. Hope everybody enjoyed it. You can send your threats, complaints, dissertations, compliments to me on Mob Talk Radio on Facebook, at Real Mob Talk 7 on Twitter, or however you find me, because everybody always finds me. Next week, I'm not sure what we're going to do. It is about time for another large Q&A, so you can send me Q&A questions at Real Mob Talk 7 on Twitter in my personal message box. Please, not publicly, just message me the inbox, go over to Facebook, message me personally, ask any question you want. Nothing is banned or barred from the questions. I hope everybody enjoys a good week. Next week's supposed to be nice here in New York. So all that being said, have a great week, everybody, and we will see you next week. And don't forget to submit those questions. Get them in early. The best chance for me to answer them will be the earlier you get them in, because you're at the top of my list. So have a great week, and thanks for listening in.